And so I'm on my way, in search of reason and inspiration. Agnieszka and Michał Parry, to whom I'm travelling, are no strangers. We have known each other for some time now. They are my parents' friends, but we have never talked about serious matters like this. I have never asked questions like the ones I plan on asking today.
Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome.
Jest Michał.
I like coming here. Michał, Agnieszka and their amazing family.
2 wraps.
I don't feel like a stranger at all, more so like one of them. I guess that's just how they are. Open and always friendly.
So, how did I come to meet God? I think the important thing in my life is not that I met God in a sudden way like St. Paul on the road to Damascus. It was a journey, and there's different parts of that journey. So I grew up just in a sort of middle class background in England. Neither of my parents went to church. As a family we didn't go to church. I'd been baptised as a child, but just out of tradition, I guess. And then the first step was when I was in school. There's a community or an organisation called the Gideon Society who give out Bibles. Sometimes they're in hospitals, sometimes they're in prisons, places, hotels, places like that. But they also came around to our school and they gave out everybody a Bible. And in the front of the Bible there's a little kind of like a diary and a reading for every day. And even though I didn't have any faith, even though I didn't go to church, I didn't really know who God was, I decided to read the daily reading out loud every morning. And I was faithful to that. And therefore I know that from that point, by proclaiming God's word aloud every day, that it was working in me, that it was having an effect in me. Or I can tell this now looking back, I didn't know at the time. Also in there it talked about giving the tithe. So even as a child I started tithing my pocket money to different charities. So I was reading the Bible out loud and I was tithing, but yet not having any faith, not knowing who God was. And then a couple of years later at the local church in our small town, Billy Graham came to do a mission. So Billy Graham back in the 1980s was one of the biggest evangelist there was in the world, one of the most famous evangelists there was in the world, and I've got no idea to this day what he was doing in our small town, but he did a mission, and for some reason I decided to go. And at the end of the mission there was what they call the altar call, where they ask you to say, if you want to come forwards and give your life to Jesus, then come up and we'll lead you through a prayer. So I went up, went through the prayer and said the words of giving my life to Jesus, but nothing changed. Or at least, nothing seemed to change. Again, I know looking back that gave God permission to work in my life. And there wasn't, maybe at that time in that place, there wasn't an opportunity for me to be in the right place for God to take the next step. But it gave God authority in my life. The next kind of step along the journey was when I was at university. There was a student in my year who was a newly converted Jehovah's Witness, and he was so passionate, he was so full of enthusiasm, trying to and he awoke in me a desire to find God. In fact, he did a really incredible job. He awoke probably in our year about 15 people through him actually came to Jesus, because he awoke in people a desire to find the truth, a desire to find God. But the more I spoke to him, the more I realised that desire was there, that need for God, But some of what he was saying wasn't right. It didn't fit with what I'd been reading in the Bible for the last 10 years. So even though I didn't know who God was, it awoke in me a desire to find him, and yet I knew what he was saying wasn't quite right. So through that, through meeting him, I started then going to an evangelical church, and I finally gave my life to Jesus in something like an alpha course. So an alpha course is where they take you through the steps of faith, starting off, well, who is God? Or rather, even, does God exist? If God exists, who is God? And then taking you through the fact that actually the only true God is Jesus Christ, and the only way to salvation is through Jesus Christ. And so I gave my life to Jesus in a more complete way, in a more conscious way, there when I was a student at age about 19, in that evangelical church. That's when I was, I would say, a committed Christian at that point. But it's interesting looking back, there'd been those several steps along the journey where God had put his hand on my life and protected me and kept me going in the right place, in the right direction. In that evangelical church there was a very strong emphasis on the Bible, on what the Bible taught, and on living your life according to what was written in the Bible. And I spent a lot of time reading and studying the Bible, discussing theology, discussing different things like evolution versus creation and things like that. But I realised that there was something missing, if you like. The truth was there, but maybe the truth is more in the head, more theoretical, not a living truth. So I started also going to a charismatic church, and there it was very much more exciting. The Spirit was working, things were alive, but there wasn't any emphasis on truth and on what the Bible said. And so I had these two different things, both of which were true, both of which were real. One was more to the head, and one was maybe more to the heart. And I was, in a sense, looking for a church where those two could be combined, where you could have the truth of the Bible and also the life of the Spirit. It was about that time that I met my now wife, Agnieszka. I, as a new and enthusiastic evangelical Christian, I wanted to give my time to God. So I decided that summer I was going to give it to God, and there's all sorts of projects you can do as a young Christian. You can go and help build a school in South America or a medical centre in Africa, and that's what I was going to do. I was going to give my time to God. And so I wrote off to about 70 different organisations, but with most of them you had to provide the money yourself, pay for your airfare and so, which I didn't have. The only place that wrote back was a retreat centre in Yorkshire in England, which of course isn't very far away or very exciting compared to South America and Peru or somewhere in Africa. So I said, all right, God, if that's what you've got for me, then I'll go. So I did. And that's where I met my now wife, Agnieszka. And of course, through that, and through community, I've now travelled to various different countries. So God did answer my prayer, just not in the way I was thinking about it. And Agnieszka, my wife, is from Poland, Wrocław in Poland. So I went over to see her family, and that's where I met the community, Koinonia John the Baptist. But of course, that was a Catholic community. And initially my evangelical training was telling me that the Catholic Church is evil, that it's the whore of Babylon and things like that. But yet, I could see that was the very place where there was the truth of the Bible and the life of the Spirit combined together in one community. And that's exactly what I've been looking for. So and then as I actually met the Catholic Church and I realised it wasn't the caricature that I'd been told as an evangelical Christian, then those three things came together, which is kerkako, which is evangelization, the truth of the gospel, the proclamation, the life in the Spirit and community. And that's where I met and fell in love with Koinonia.
Scargill House is a place in north of England, Yorkshire, where there is a community who lives there, and they run retreats for Christians. One time I went up to the hills and it was a beautiful sunset, and I looked and I said, Jesus, I will follow you whenever you want me to go. And that experience, I think it was my second conversion experience there. As much as falling in love with Michael, it was also, I think, falling in love with Jesus again. So that was very beautiful. And that's how we started journeying together.
This was a time before internet, before EasyJet, before emails. So we wrote letters, lots of love letters to one another, which we still have up in the loft, all our love letters to each other.
We've got 100 letters.
We've got 100 letters to each, so 200 letters overall, love letters overall. But they weren't just about the love for one another, it was also then about faith and about community, because during this time the community that Agnieszka was in Wrocław was becoming Koinonia John the Baptist, and that's how I met Koinonia John the Baptist. And I think it was a bit like that time in Yorkshire. It was just the simplicity of faith. So Koinonia, or particularly the people that came from Koinonia to Poland, like Emanuele and Fabrizio, when they were doing the preaching, you could tell that they were what they preached. There wasn't a sense of falseness, there wasn't a sense of them trying to say something to impress. What they said, they lived. What they said, they did. And it was that authenticity that really made us fall in love with Koinonia.
But also I think the joy, there was an immense joy that they were giving out, and that joy was authentic, and it wasn't the joy that was brought by anything else but their faith.
The joy of the Lord, yeah.
And it was contagious, that joy was contagious, you could not stop wanting that joy.
And one of the, I think, one other thing that really struck us in Koinonia is Campermo, which is the birthplace of Koinonia. It's a place up in the mountains, in the Dolomite Mountains in Italy, where there's just a couple of houses. Well, now there's a few more buildings, but then it was just this place, Campermo, and that's where Koinonia was born many years ago. And we went there for the first time, it was 2 months after we got married. And we've been back, I don't know, 10, 15 times in total, and each time it's a place where you can just step back from your normal life, because the people there are living for Jesus, the people there are authentic, the people there are joyful, the people there live in friendship, and you can step back from the complexities of your everyday life and what should we do this, that and the other, and you can just be, and you can feel the presence of God.
And I think also going to Campermo helped us in times when we had difficulty in our life and we felt we needed to step back on everyday life and just take a retreat, just go and... So that was also a good place where we knew that people there love us as we are.
They was received us as friends, they received us for who we are. So you didn't, again, it was that idea of not trying to be somebody you're not. We could go there with our problems, with our difficulties, just who we are, and we were always received and accepted and loved. Yeah. So Michal, I think probably the best thing for you to do is to go to Campermo yourself. Where you are in life at the moment, if you're not quite sure what decisions to take, what to study, where to live, what to do with yourself, that's the sort of place in the mountains that you can go and just retreat a little bit. There's just an atmosphere of peace, an atmosphere of friendship, an atmosphere of joy. You can step back from the world and just be there with God. That's the place where Father Ricardo, the founder of Koinonia, that's where he started it all. And that's where, if you like, the whole vision of Koinonia comes from. And when you go there, you can also catch that vision for your own life, what God wants you to do for your life.
On my way to Bristol, I thought this was the end of my quest, only to find out that this is the beginning. What's best is still ahead of me. Next stop, Italy, Campomo.